The cliches in entrepreneurship. Let me show you what I'm talking about with these cliches, all of which I think get in the way of real entrepreneurship and actually confuse people about startups and what it takes. So let's start with this one. Be your own boss. The entrepreneur starts the company to be your own boss. And that's just not the case. Your customer is your boss. Your client is your boss. In the old days, when it was just me and the keyboard and spreadsheets and market research, I can't tell you how often I ended up 2, 3 in the morning. I was tired. I had a normal day coming the next day. I was there because I had a presentation to give to my client. So who's the boss there? If you need money, then you're not your own boss. Cliche number 2, president and chief bottle washer. The idea that the entrepreneur does everything and is everybody. And I've seen it so often. You have to recognize that doing business takes a series of functions. The image here, the play, well, there's a quarterback who does one thing, and there's the split end who does another, and there's the center, and there's in the team, whether it's football in this case, or soccer, or basketball, or what have you, team sports, they have different functions, right? And a business, to survive, needs to have somebody making the product or delivering the service, or somebody managing the money and administering and keeping the books and watching for taxes, then somebody else trying to manage the brand and send the message and do the social media, and in some cases somebody else in charge of sales and whatever. So the classic startup, you don't have to do everything, okay? That's the important thing. Don't think that if you hate selling or if you hate bookkeeping, you can't be an entrepreneur. You simply need to acknowledge that there are different functions and you need other people involved. The concept of displacement is something I've developed. I've never really read about it in business literature, and I try to keep up, but it just seems obvious to me. The picture here is what happens when a jar full of pebbles gets another pebble. Water splashes out, right? That's displacement. In entrepreneurship, startups, and small business, as opposed to this cliche of president and chief bottle washer that does everything, I say there is the principle of displacement, which means everything you do rules out something else that you can't do because you're doing that first thing. And that basic principle drives startups and small business in general. If you're going to succeed, you have to resist the temptation to do everything because it won't work. There's not enough time, energy, and resource to do everything. So you run into this problem of displacement because you end up doing things not well or only half doing them. Another one that comes in this same vein is, as you deal with business problems, first settle into what knobs you have to turn. Now, what does this mean? Think of yourself caught in the freeway somewhere. You're going to be late for an appointment. The traffic is terrible. You wish you had left earlier, but then this traffic was worse than normal. What knobs do you have to turn? You can't press the accelerator and go forward. You'll hit the car in front of you. You can't go sideways. You're caught in the freeway. You can't go up because you don't have a helicopter. So accelerator, steering wheel, and brake are pretty useless. The knobs you have to turn in that situation are the cell phone, the air conditioner, the radio, basically, to call ahead and et cetera, et cetera. And in a business situation, you can't waste your time thinking about what you would do to fix this that only takes $400,000. If there's no way you can get a hold of $400,000, that's not a knob you can turn. So you don't waste time. You focus on, back down to my situation, what can I actually do in this situation, and what are my realistic options? I'll finish this about president and chief bottle washer with one of my favorite quotes. Quote, I don't know what the secret to success is, but I do know that the secret to failure is trying to please everybody. And boom, that's core in small business, and that's the antithesis, the other side of the coin of we're all president and chief bottle washer, we're supposed to do everything. You can't do everything. So you have to focus and do the right things. And that cliche leads us off to the wrong place. Another cliche, and this, as I go through them, they get worse. Just do what you love. Frankly, that causes so much heartache and so much misunderstanding and so much frustration of people banging their heads against the wall because I'm supposed to do what I love. And here the truth to this one is, well, no, not unless people will pay money for you to do what you love. I like playing a guitar. Nobody's ever paid me money to play the guitar. Look at this when we're talking about do what you love. Can you make money? Just think about it. Do what you love. Can you make money? And how about this? Do you have the resources? So I'm a great chef. I want to open a restaurant. But in my market, the kind of restaurant I want, hypothetically, takes $500,000 or $1 million in resources to do it right. Well, you can't just decree that you love it, right? If you don't have background and credibility to get outside money, outside investors, and you don't have your own money, well then you need to temper that do what you love with some common sense, like maybe you start with a food cart or you get a job as a chef in that restaurant and work your way up and eventually save your money. But it doesn't help to just do what you love if you don't have the resources to do it successfully, right? You have to fill a need. Now, one of the things I watched firsthand for years, I was consulting with Apple Computer. I was never an employee, but I was consulting in strategy from 82 through 94. And one of the things I watched was in about 1990, the identification of a need that summarizes here. It was the calendar and notes and contacts that people were carrying around as a notebook, as physical paper. And somebody saw that, well, that's all subject to computerization and productization, right? So there's a need. And unfortunately, what Apple Computer did then, 92, 93-ish, was called the Apple Newton. You may not remember it. The Apple Newton was produced by Apple Computer to fill that need of the calendar, the contacts, and the notepad. The problem was, and this is getting towards the point, it didn't really fill the need because this thing cost a little bit more than $1,000 and it weighed about a pound. And the handwriting recognition didn't work very well, so Apple identified a need, but they didn't really fill it. And the Apple Newton, if you go back and look at the lore of business, it failed. But then 4 years later, 95, 96-ish, comes the Palm Pilot. Remember, the Palm Pilot was enormously successful and changed the world, filling exactly that need. And the difference between the Newton, which didn't do it, and the Palm Pilot was this one, when it came out, cost about a third of what the Newton cost, weighed about a third of what the Newton weighed, and they had this system called graffiti that was a special quasi-handwriting that made the handwriting recognition work. So do what you love helps, but that's not enough. So let me get now to this annoying cliche about passion, persistence, and perseverance. This is one that really bothers me with what I've seen in 30-some years of entrepreneurship, because the supposed pundits imply with that stubbornness makes for success. And I'm sure that passion, persistence, perseverance, stubbornness are really important in the borderline cases where making it took longer than expected, and because something that became successful took struggle and these people kept struggling, then eventually it became successful. I'm sure that happened somewhat, but it had to have the characteristics to be successful. It had to have, like I said earlier, it had to be giving value. It had to be doing something people would pay for. It really had to fill a need, or else passion, persistence, and perseverance are just banging your head against the wall, and it's bad advice that people give. And think about this one. They call it survivor bias. Who talks about entrepreneurship? Older people who have supposedly made it, right? They've done it. People want them to say, here's how you do it. Well, we should also be listening to the people who didn't make it. And those ones, among them, you're going to find lots of them who will say, screw passion and persistence and perseverance. I should have seen earlier that this wasn't going to work, so I wouldn't have gotten that second and third mortgage. I might not have lost the house. I might not have lost spouse or significant other because I was stubbornly insisting. And meanwhile, there were entrepreneurs out there who were saying, oh, just stay, don't lose faith, and fear is your worst enemy, and keep going and you'll be successful. And no, not always. There are these structural problems. For example, don't price too low. If you're back in that old world that they teach you in Economics 101, microeconomics, where the lower price means higher volume, for example, I've seen countless startups fail because they think somehow they're supposed to come out with a low price. Because somebody thought that in college, or somebody read microeconomics or whatever. That was about coal and commodities. And in today's world, startups are much more likely to make it and survive if they're aiming at the higher price portions of the market, giving more value, more customization. And for heaven's sakes, whatever you do, pricing is your first message, and one of the most common mistakes, which will completely override passion, persistence, and perseverance, is pricing too low. You need to be able to structurally work the company. And that has to do with where you fit and how you match your messaging and your product with the market and the market needs, and what I call strategic alignment. And here we see, just as an example, which, by the way, to give credit, this comes from Kotler, the most prolific marketing textbook author ever, whose marketing textbooks have been used by about 50 years worth of MBAs. The classic positioning. Don't do everything, right? Focus, focus. So the bacon and eggs breakfast here is the one thing, and it's going to have to be more expensive and slower, and the instant breakfast is going to be less expensive and quicker, and that leads us to the idea that completely independently of passion, persistence, and perseverance, you got to manage your strategy right and serve a market need and actually answer that need, irregardless of passion and persistence. So moving on to another really important, this overemphasis on the idea. I call that here the cliché, the big idea. And there's so many misconceptions there that I want to start with this. Good ideas get copied. So there's the classic Volkswagen. I had one that was dark green in 1970s. Loved that car. Great car. So 20 years go by, and sometime in the late 1990s, we get this. What a great idea. We'll do a Volkswagen in 1998, I think it was, or 97, that looks like the old one, but it's new, and people love the old one, and so this gives it, what a great idea, right? There's a point I'm trying to make here, though, that you have to realize. It's legal and encouraged in the United States and the Western world, and really good business to copy good ideas. If you have a good idea, you'll get copied. So there's the Volkswagen. What do you think this was? That came roughly 5 years after Volkswagen's success. Mini Cooper from 1960s, the car enthusiasts loved it. BMW buys Cooper Works and ends up with a Mini Cooper completely redone and modernized in the early 2000s. And it was a huge success, right? It was copying Volkswagen. And so what? And could Volkswagen say, oh my God, poor me, my idea got copied? No, what does Volkswagen say? That's competition. That's free enterprise. That's economics. That's the world. Fast forward to about, another 8 or 10 years, and boom, the same thing again. Fiat, the Fiat 500 from the 50s and 60s now becomes the Fiat of the 2012 and our area. Point. Businesses don't live off the idea. They live off something else. Good ideas get copied. Another example. Apple Computer wasn't the first personal computer manufacturer. There was MIPS and Altair like 3 and 2 years before Apple started. And in fact, the idea wasn't theirs. The picture here, Steve Wozniak, Steve Jobs, teenagers, they get together. They were going to the Stanford Computer Club every Thursday night for a couple of years. And at those meetings, every Thursday night, the whole group talked about, boy, the world sure needs a personal computer or another personal computer. So it wasn't the idea that drove Apple. It was execution. Steve Jobs got Mike Markula, the sales guy, Regis McKenna about marketing and messaging. He got some investors. Wozniak did the technical thing for the boards, and they didn't come up with the idea. They created a company and executed on the idea, and that's what matters. But Google wasn't the first. Google didn't succeed because they were the first one to do it. They weren't unique. They just did it really well, and they did it better. So that's not the idea. That's something else. Starbucks. Starbucks really had a formula that anybody could copy, and a lot of businesses have. Some have sort of moderately made it, but Starbucks is Starbucks, and it wasn't about the idea, was it? We tend to think in our culture about new business mapping to new ideas, new things, new technology that didn't exist. When in fact, the vast majority of businesses that launch and are successful aren't new businesses, they're displacement without being first or unique. And what particularly bugs me about the cliche related to this is I've seen over and over again when people get together, people who want to start a company, entrepreneurs, get together and talk about, let's do this or let's do that. How often is there somebody in the group that dismisses, oh, but that's been done. Oh, that's already, yeah, that's such and such, you know. I want to do, oh, that's Yelp. That already exists. You can't do that. You can do that. And that's why I make a point of it. You can do what they're doing and just do it better. So this leads me to this concept, which I deal with a lot. We have to filter ideas from opportunities. Your idea has no value without a team and resources to execute it. So opportunity then is a subset of ideas. Opportunity is something that will make money. There is a market. You have the resources and you're going to take the risk. Then that's an opportunity that's worth pursuing. And how do you tell? What's the filter? Well, the cliche is the business plan. I do advocate the business plan. But where I object to the cliche is it's not that big formal business plan document. I say, what a shame that people think about that big business plan instead of what every business needs, regardless of you need a loan, you need investment, regardless. Every business has enormous potential benefit from what I call a lean business plan. This is the filter between idea, and opportunity. And this is the management tool that grows your business. So I'm going to move now with that last cliche of the big business plan behind me. I'm going to move now into, so what do you do? Well, let's start with this, the mirror method. What business to start? It starts with who you are, what you like, what you're good at, what you like to do, what people expect of you, how you're different, what you can do with that difference that gives you an edge up on other people doing business. So if that sounds like do what you love and passion and all that, sort of, because I'm saying look at the mirror and consider all that, but then I'm also saying go back to the other side of those cliches and think about what I've said about, but do something that people will pay for, give people value, fill a need. So I hinted at this earlier. It's not as simple as do what you love, but it is consider who you are and what you like and how you're different, and then move from there into what business are you going to do. So I hinted at that also. You like skiing, be a ski teacher, sell skis. You like guitars, sell guitars. The idea is you go from there, but you do have to think about something that people will pay for and people will like. So in that vein, I talked about just a few minutes ago the cliche of the big business plan, and I mentioned the lean business plan. So I want to look at this, and this, by the way, is from draft material that I'm working on. I plan to publish the book Lean Business Planning. The important thing in this one is the 4 steps, and I'll go into each of those steps in a couple minutes. They are strategy, tactics, milestones, and basic numbers. And you do that, and then in the process of lean planning, you'll see there's a decision point. Do we have a business plan event? Now, to me, a business plan event means mostly applying for a loan or seeking investment. There are moments in the business history, the business life, which I call business plan events, where you actually do need to create a business plan that somebody else can read. I mean, documents are obsolete, but PDF online or what have you, you still need that formal plan that starts with an executive summary and includes management description, and you have to prove or validate the market for investors and all of that. The point, though, that I want to make is if you don't have that business plan event, it's not like you don't want planning. You don't need and deserve to manage strategy, tactics, and milestones and so on. But don't confuse the lean business planning with the formal business plan. Because if you don't have the business plan event, form follows function. Don't do the formal business plan. Just do those 4 steps, and then I'll also go into the cycle at the end. So let's look at these steps now. What do you do if you don't have a business plan event? You start with strategy. Now there's lots and lots of writing on strategy. People do PhDs on strategy, and there's whole sections in the bookstore on strategy. I want to simplify it. In my experience, I haven't seen one yet in the areas of startups and small business and entrepreneurship that can't boil down to 3 factors that work off each other. One is identity. And by identity, I mean the substance of the SWOT analysis. If you know SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Strengths and weaknesses. What do you like? How are you different? What's your background as a person, if you're starting up, and as a company? Core competence, what has evolved that you do well? That's something that sets you apart, and that's one of the 3 fundamental poles of your strategy. The other is the market. Think of the restaurant. If you identify that your restaurant is aiming for people who really appreciate fine food, farm to table, organic, or maybe not healthy, but great sauces and what have you. But in one area or another, let's just say that your identity has to do with being a chef and cuisine and so on, and your market is you don't want the people who are rushing from one appointment to another and need a drive-through to get a quick, are those meals when they're that fast? I mean, but you don't want them. You don't want the kids. You want the adults, usually in couples or in small groups, who care about the dining and who want that. And so that's the market. You have a target market. And then the offering, I use that word, I'm sorry, I like IMO for this. So offering is product or service. And in the restaurant example, so you see how that works. So it's really important that if you have that identity in that market, that you then put onto the menu really good food that matches your identity and your chosen target market. So you don't have fine foods that have a drive-through window. You don't have fine foods that are cheap. Remember, I said earlier about pricing is your marketing message. You match the business offering to the market. And now this is important. Strategy is not some long-winded treatise that you fear in a formal business plan. Strategy is the thinking, and it's a few bullet points to remind you. As your business goes on, there will be opportunities that pull away from strategy, and you'll occasionally need reminders of, yeah, but we need to focus on our strategy. It's not writing heavy. It's bullet points. This is not that plan people fear. Step one is get your strategy straight, and let's recognize before I go to step two that you probably already have it. Write down a few points to help you remember in the crush of the business and the routine and so on, but you probably already have your strategy, and I hope that this helps you to sort of separate it and think of how it works together. And it's not a writing exercise, it's thinking. Step two is tactics. The best way I can talk about tactics is with these examples here. Tactics in the old formal business plan would end up being the core structure of the marketing section of a classic business plan, or the product section of a classic business plan, or the financial and management section of a classic business plan. But here too, we're talking about get the thinking straight. Use a few bullet points. You want to write this down because it's going to change and you're going to want to manage change, but you don't want to write it down beautifully edited in long text that's hard to do unless you have a business plan event. And 90+% of the people who are listening to me and will listen to me in this don't have the business plan event. So this is not an academic exercise. This is not writing. This is thinking. And think about what it's going to take in terms of pricing and messaging and channels, the social media that becomes more important every day. If your physical product going through channels, packaging is important. Launch dates, secret sauce, differentiator. These examples here on the identity side, am I going out for investment? Am I financing myself? Am I bootstrapping? The management side, who's on the team? What skills do they have? And so on, locations. These are all tactics in the wording, the vocabulary of the lean business planning. These are not long expositionary texts. These are tactics. You need to have the tactics straight in your business, and you kind of need to write them down if you're going to be able to manage the change. And they will change. Lean business planning assumes change. It's always changing. That's part of the process. So, step one, strategy. Step two, tactics. Step three, the specifics. Here's the core. The most important part of the lean business plan is what happens, when, dates, tasks, responsibilities. We have to launch by November in order to get the Christmas buying. We have to have the loan by August in order to launch by November. These are your specifics. You cannot manage a business without it. And here too, We're not talking about text. We're talking about lists and follow-up and tracking and metrics, concrete specifics, task assignments, who's responsible for what. All of that stuff that's basically management and steering a company. Without the text, it's not a formal plan. It's to be used internally. There's no fluff here. But all of this is extremely important. Step 3, concrete specifics. Step 4, you can't do without. Here's something. I mean, people hate forecasting. Oh, I don't have a CPA. I don't have an MBA. How do you forecast? Well, I'll tell you this to start. Hard as it might be to forecast sales, costs, and expenses and cash flow, and it might be. You're guessing. People don't like to guess. Hard as that is, it's a whole lot easier than trying to run a business without it. Remind yourself that it's not about guessing right. It's about laying numbers out, months, items, expense items, amounts. It's about laying numbers out. It's about educated guessing, all against the background of you knowing, because you're in the lean business planning mode, that it doesn't matter that you aren't right today when you project sales, costs, and expenses 9 months from now, because 6 weeks from now you're going to go back and see at your projections and see how they've changed, what's different from what you planned, and that will become the core of management. Plan versus actual is management. That's what this is about. So you can't really manage cash flow without projecting some of these basic numbers, and that gives you away when you're wrong. And by the way, you will be wrong. All business plans are wrong. It's not about guessing the future right. It's about tracking the dependencies so that if sales are up, you notice what marketing is working and you add money to that. And if sales is down, you see it and you cut the expenses in time. It's all these connected dots that you're going to track every month with plan versus actual. And that's the value of the forecasting. And I know that's a tough point because people hate it, but it's doable and it's something that will help you manage. Just make sure though that you get the value. So plan your review sessions. I've done for 25 years, the third Thursday of every month. Take a couple hours. Make sure you do the discipline of tracking, measuring, and going back and seeing what worked and what didn't work. What was the difference between plan versus actual and why, and what you do about it. Those 4 steps then, that's what repeats. Strategy, tactics, concrete specifics, and the business numbers, and you review them. Here's the cycle. The whole idea of lean, by the way, started in the 30s and 40s with lean in reference to manufacturing. It had to do with a cycle very much like this one. I've revised it only slightly to call it plan, run, review, and revise. You've probably heard of the lean startup in this area that has to do with going a little way, turning around, the same kind of a cyclical function that I'm showing you here. Planning needs that too. You don't just do a business plan, you do a lean business plan. You don't do that executive summary, forget it until you have the business plan event. The describing your management team, forget it. You know who you are until the time of the business plan event. So do the lean plan and get going and review it regularly, and it becomes something that drives your business. So that's the way you want to work this. That's really what I'm saying, aside from the cliches, beyond the cliches in this whole presentation. That's going to drive your business. That's the way to do it. And you will be able then to get past those cliches. And I can't say you'll be successful. It depends on you and your execution. But I certainly like this idea as a way to focus in, reduce the uncertainty, and get going with that and work towards your success. So, I'm Tim Barry. I'm glad you've taken this time and got to the end. Thank you for that. For me, it's fun. I enjoy this. I believe in what I'm saying. So.